The Faery Handbag. I used to go to thrift stores with my friends. We'd take the train into Boston and go to the Garment District, which is this huge vintage clothing warehouse. Everything is arranged by color, and somehow that makes all of the clothes beautiful. It's kind of like if you went through the wardrobe in the Narnia books, only instead of finding Aslan and the White Witch and horrible Eustace, you found this magical clothing world. Instead of talking animals, there were feather boas and wedding dresses and bowling shoes and paisley shirts and Doc Martens, and everything hung up on racks so that first you have black dresses all together, like the world's largest indoor funeral, and then blue dresses, all the blues you can imagine, and then red dresses, and so on. Pink reds and orangey reds, purple reds, exit light reds, candy reds. Sometimes I would close my eyes and Natasha and Natalie and Jake would drag me over to a rack and rub a dress against my hand. "Guess what color this is," they'd say. We had this theory that you could learn how to tell, just by feeling what color something was. For example, if you're sitting on a lawn, you can tell what color green the grass is with your eyes closed, depending on how silky rubbery it feels. With clothing, stretchy velvet stuff always feels red when your eyes are closed, even if it's not red. Natasha was always best at guessing colors, but Natasha is also best at cheating at games and not getting caught. One time we were looking through kids' t-shirts and we found a Muppet t-shirt that had belonged to Natalie in 3rd grade, and we knew it belonged to her because it still had her name inside where her mother had written it in permanent marker when Natalie went to summer camp. Jake bought it back for her because he was the only one who had money that weekend. He was the only one who had a job. Maybe you're wondering what a guy like Jake is doing in the Garment District with a bunch of girls. The thing about Jake is that he always has a good time no matter what he's doing. He likes everything and he likes everyone, but he likes me best of all. Wherever he is now, I bet he's having a great time and wondering when I'm going to show up. I'm always running late, but he knows that. We had this theory that things have life cycles, the way that people do. The life cycle of wedding dresses and feather boas and t-shirts and shoes and handbags involves the Garment District. If clothes are good, or even if they're bad in an interesting way, the Garment District is where they go when they die. You can tell that they're dead because of the way that they smell. When you buy them and wash them and start wearing them again, and they start to smell like you, that's when they reincarnate. But the point is, if you're looking for a particular thing, you just have to keep looking for it. You have to look hard. Down in the basement of the Garment District, they sell clothing in beat-up suitcases and teacups by the pound. You can get 8 pounds worth of prom dresses, a slinky black dress, a poofy lavender dress, a swirly pink dress, a silvery, starry lame dress so fine you could pass it through a key ring, for $8. I go there every week, hunting for Grandmother Sophia's Faery Handbag. The Faery Handbag. It's huge and black and kind of hairy. Even when your eyes are closed, it feels black as black ever gets. Like, if you touch it, your hand might get stuck in it, like tar or black quicksand, or when you stretch out your hand at night to turn on a light, but all you feel is darkness. Fairies live inside it. I know what that sounds like, but it's true. Grandmother Sophia said it was a family heirloom. She said that it was over 200 years old. She said that when she died, I had to look after it and be its guardian, and she said that it would be my responsibility. I said that it didn't look that old and that they didn't have handbags 200 years ago, but that just made her cross. She said, "So then tell me, Genevieve, darling, where do you think old ladies used to put their reading glasses and their heart medicine and their knitting needles?" I know that no one is going to believe any of this, and that's okay. If I thought you would, then I couldn't tell you, actually. Promise me that you won't believe a word. That's what Sophia used to say to me when she told me stories. At the funeral, my mother said, half laughing and half crying, that her mother was the world's best liar. I think she thought maybe Sophia wasn't really dead. But I went up to Sophia's coffin and I looked her right in the eyes. They were closed. The funeral parlor had made her up with blue eyeshadow and blue eyeliner. She looked like she was going to be a news anchor on Fox Television instead of dead. It was creepy, and it made me even sadder than I already was, but I didn't let that distract me. "Okay, Sophia," I whispered. "I know you're dead, but this is important. You know exactly how important this is. Where's the handbag? What did you do with it? How do I find it? What am I supposed to do now?" Of course, she didn't say a word. She just lay there, this little smile on her face, as if she thought the whole thing, death, blue eyeshadow, Jake, the handbags, fairies, Scrabble, Baldezi Warlekistan, all of it. It was a joke. She always did have a weird sense of humor, and that's why she and Jake got along so well. I grew up in a house next door to the house where my mother lived when she was a little girl. Her mother, Sophia Swink, my grandmother, babysat me while my mother and father were at work. Sophia never looked like a grandmother. She had long black hair, which she plaited up into spiky towers. She had large blue eyes. She was taller than my father. She looked like a spy or a ballerina or a lady pirate or a rock star. She acted like one, too. For example, she never drove anywhere. She rode a bike. It drove my mother crazy. "Why can't you act your age?" she'd say, and Sophia would just laugh. Sophia and I played Scrabble all the time. Sophia always won. Even though her English wasn't all that great, because we decided that she was allowed to use Baldezi Warleki vocabulary. Baldezi Warlekistan is where Sophia was born over 200 years ago. That's what Sophia said. My grandmother claims to be over 200 years old, or maybe even older. Sometimes she claimed that she'd even met Genghis Khan. He was much shorter than her. I probably don't have time to tell that story. Well, Baldezi Warlekistan is also an incredibly valuable word in Scrabble points, even though it doesn't exactly fit on the board. Sophia put it down the first time we played. I was feeling pretty good because I'd just gotten 41 points for Zippery on my turn. Sophia kept rearranging her letters on her tray, and then she looked over at me as if daring me to stop her, and put down Ezi Warlekistan after bald. She used delicious, Zippery, wishes, kismet, and needle, and made 2 into toe. Baldezi Warlekistan. It went all the way across the board, and then trailed off down the right-hand side. I started laughing. "I used up all my letters," Sophia said. She licked her pencil and started adding up the points. "That's not a word," I said. "Baldezi Warlekistan is not a word. Besides, you can't do that. You can't put an 18-letter word on a board that's 15 squares across." "Why not? It's a country," Sophia said. "It's where I was born, little darling." "Challenge," I said. I went and got the dictionary and looked up. "There's no such place." "Of course there isn't nowadays," Sophia said. "It wasn't a very big place, even when it was a place. But you've heard of Samarkand and Uzbekistan and the Silk Road and Genghis Khan. Haven't I told you about meeting Genghis Khan?" I looked up Samarkand. "Okay," I said. "Samarkand is a real place and a real word, but Baldezi Warlekistan isn't." "They call it something else now," Sophia said. "But I think it's important to remember where we come from. I think it's only fair that I get to use Baldezi Warleki words. Your English is so much better than me. Promise me something, mouthful of dumpling, a small, small thing. You will remember its real name, Baldezi Warlekistan. Now, when I add it up, I get 368 points. Could that be right? If you call the Faery Handbag by its right name, it would be something like Orzipani Kanix, which means the bag of skin where the world lives. Only Sophia never spelled the word the same way twice. She said you had to spell it a little differently each time. You never wanted to spell it exactly the right way because that would be dangerous. I call it the Faery Handbag because I put fairy, F-A-E-R-Y, down on the Scrabble board once, and Sophia said that you spell it with an I, not an E. She looked it up in the dictionary and lost a turn. Sophia said that in Baldezi Warlekistan they use the board and tiles for divination, prognostication, and sometimes even just for fun. She said it was a little like playing Scrabble. That's probably why she turned out to be so good at it. The Baldezi Warlekistanians use their tiles and boards to communicate with the people who lived under the hill. The people who live under the hill knew the future. The Baldezi Warlekistanians gave them fermented milk and honey, and the young women of the village used to go and lie out on the hill and sleep under the stars. Apparently, the people under the hill were pretty cute. The important thing was that you never went down into the hill and spent the night there, because no matter how cute the guy from under the hill was, if you did, even if you spent only a single night under the hill, when you came out again, 100 years might have passed. "Remember that," Sophia said to me. "It doesn't matter how cute a guy is. If he wants you to come back to his place, it isn't a good idea. It's okay to fool around, but don't spend the night." Every once in a while, a woman from under the hill would marry a man from the village, even though it never ended well. The problem was that the women under the hill, they were terrible cooks. They couldn't get used to the way time worked in the village, which meant the supper was always burnt, or else it wasn't cooked long enough. But they couldn't stand to be criticized. It hurt their feelings. So if their village husband complained, or even if he looked like he wanted to complain, that was it. The woman from under the hill went back to her home, and even if her husband went and begged and pleaded and apologized, it might be 3 years or 30 years, or a few generations before she came back out. Even the best, happiest marriages between the Baldezi-Werlekistanians and the people under the hill fell apart when the children got old enough to complain about dinner. But everyone in the village had some hill blood in them. "It's in you," Sophia said and kissed me on the nose. "Passed down from my grandmother and her mother. It's why we're so beautiful." When Sophia was 19, the shaman priestess in her village threw the tiles and discovered that something bad was going to happen. A raiding party was coming. There was no point in fighting them. They would burn down everyone's houses, take the young men and women for slaves, and it was even worse than that. There was going to be an earthquake as well, which was bad news because usually when raiders showed up, the village went down under the hill for a night, and when they came out again, the raiders would have been gone for months or decades or even 100 years. But this earthquake was going to split the hill right open. The people under the hill were in trouble. Their home would be destroyed, and they would be doomed to roam the face of the earth, weeping and lamenting their fate until the sun blew out and the sky cracked and the seas boiled and the people dried up and turned to dust and blew away. So the shaman priestess went and divined some more, and the people under the hill told her to kill a black dog and skin it and use the skin to make a purse big enough to hold a chicken, an egg, and a cooking pot. So she did. And then the people under the hill made the inside of the purse big enough to hold all of the village, and all of the people under the hill, and mountains, and forest, and sea, and rivers, and lakes, and orchards, and sky, and stars, and spirits, and fabulous monsters, and sirens, and dragons, and dryads, and mermaids, and beasties, and all the little gods that Baldezi-Werlekistanians and the people under the hill worshipped. "Your purse is made out of dog skin?" I said. "That's disgusting." "Little dear pet," Sophia said, looking wistful. "Dog is delicious. To Baldezi-Werlekistanians, dog is a delicacy." Before the raiding party arrived, the village packed up all of their belongings and moved into the handbag. The clasp was made out of bone. If you opened it one way, then it was just a purse big enough to hold a chicken, and an egg, and a clay cooking pot, or else a pair of reading glasses, and a library book, and a pillbox. And if you opened the clasp another way, then you found yourself in a little boat floating at the mouth of a river. On either side of you was forest, where the Baldezi-Werlekistanian villagers and the people under the hill made their new settlement. If you opened the handbag the wrong way, though, you found yourself in a dark land that smelled like blood. That's where the guardian of the purse, the dog whose skin had been sewn into a purse, lived. The guardian had no skin. Its howl made blood come out of your ears and nose. It tore apart anyone who turned the clasp in the opposite direction and opened the purse in the wrong way. "Here is the wrong way to open the handbag," Sophia said. She twisted the clasp, showing me how she did it. She opened the mouth of the purse, but not very wide, and held it up to me. "Go ahead, darling, and listen for a second." I put my head near the handbag, but not too near. I didn't hear anything. "Well, I don't hear anything," I said. "The poor dog is probably asleep," Sophia said. "Even nightmares have to sleep now and then." After he got expelled, everybody at school called Jake Houdini instead of Jake. Everybody except for me. I'll explain why, but you have to be patient. It's hard work telling everything in the right order. Jake is smarter and also taller than most of our teachers. Not quite as tall as me. We've known each other since 3rd grade. Jake has always been in love with me. He says he was in love with me even before 3rd grade, even before we ever met. It took me a while to fall in love with Jake. In 3rd grade, Jake knew everything already, except how to make friends. He used to follow me around all day long. It made me so mad that I kicked him in the knee. And when that didn't work, I threw his backpack out the window of the school bus. That didn't work either, but the next year Jake took some tests and the school decided that he could skip 4th and 5th grade. Even I felt sorry for Jake then, because 6th grade didn't work out. When the 6th graders wouldn't stop flushing his head down the toilet, he went out and caught a skunk and then set it loose in the boys' locker room. The school was going to suspend him for the rest of the year, but instead Jake took 2 years off while his mother homeschooled him. He learned Latin, Hebrew, Greek, how to write sestinas, how to make sushi, how to play bridge, and even how to knit. He learned fencing and ballroom dancing. He worked in a soup kitchen and made a Super 8 movie about Civil War reenactors who played extreme croquet in full costume instead of firing off cannons. He started learning how to play guitar. He even wrote a novel. I've never read it, but he says it was awful. When he came back 2 years later, because his mother had cancer for the first time, the school put him back with our year, in 7th grade. He was still way too smart, but he was finally smart enough to figure out how to fit in. Plus, he was good at soccer, and he was yummy. Did I mention that he played guitar? Every girl in school had a crush on Jake, but he used to come home after school with me and play Scrabble with Sophia and ask her about Baldezi Warlekistan. Jake's mom was named Cynthia. She collected ceramic frogs and knock-knock jokes. When we were in 9th grade, she had cancer again, and when she died, Jake smashed all of her frogs. That was the first funeral I ever went to. A few months later, Jake's father asked Jake's fencing teacher out on a date. They got married right after the school expelled Jake for his AP project on Houdini. That was the first wedding I ever went to. Jake and I stole a bottle of wine and drank it, and I threw up in the swimming pool at the country club. Jake threw up all over my shoes. So anyway, the village and the people under the hill lived happily ever after for a few weeks in the handbag, which they had tied around a rock in a dry well that the people under the hill had determined would survive the earthquake. But some of the Baldezi Warlekistanians wanted to come out again and see what was going on in the world. Sophia was one of them. It had been summer when they went into the bag, but when they came out again and climbed out of the well, snow was falling, and their village was ruins and crumbly old rubble. They walked through the snow, Sophia carrying the handbag until they came to another village, one that they'd never seen before. Everyone in that village was packing up their belongings and leaving, which gave Sophia and her friends a bad feeling. It seemed to be just the same as when they went into the handbag. So they followed the refugees, who seemed to know where they were going, and finally everyone came to a city. Sophia had never seen such a place. There were trains and electric lights and movie theaters, and there were people shooting each other, bombs were falling. A war was going on. Most of the villagers decided to climb right back into the side of the handbag, but Sophia, she volunteered to stay in the world and look after the handbag. She had fallen in love with movies and silk stockings and with a young man, a Russian deserter. Sophia and the Russian deserter married and had many adventures and finally came to America, where my mother was born. Now and then Sophia would consult the tiles and talk to the people who lived in the handbag, and they would tell her how to best avoid trouble and how she and her husband could make some money. Every now and then one of the Baldezi Warlekistanians, or one of the people from under the hill, came out of the handbag and wanted to go grocery shopping, or go to a movie or an amusement park to ride on a roller coaster, or go to the library. The more advice Sophia gave her husband, the more money they made. Her husband became curious about Sophia's handbag because he could see that there was something odd about it, but Sophia told him to mind his own business. He began to spy on Sophia and saw that strange men and women were coming in and out of the house. He became convinced that either Sophia was a spy for the communists, or maybe that she was having affairs. They fought and he drank more, and finally he threw away her divination tiles. Russians make bad husbands, Sophia told me. Finally, one night while Sophia was sleeping, her husband opened the bone clasp and climbed inside the handbag. I thought he'd left me, Sophia said. For almost 20 years I thought he'd left me and your mother and taken off for California. Not that I minded. I was tired of being married and cooking dinners and cleaning house for someone else. It's better to cook what I want to eat and clean up when I decide to clean up. It was harder on your mother not having a father. That was the part I minded most. Then it turned out that he hadn't run away after all. He spent one night in the handbag and came out again 20 years later, exactly as handsome as I remembered, and enough time had passed that I had forgiven him all the quarrels. He made up with me, and it was all very romantic, and then when we had another fight the next morning, he went and kissed your mother, who had slept right through the visit, on the cheek, and he climbed right back into the handbag. I didn't see him again for another 20 years. The last time he showed up, we went to see Star Wars, and he liked it so much that he went back inside the handbag to tell everyone else about it. And in a couple of years, they'll all show up and want to see it on video, and all of the sequels, too. Tell them not to bother with the prequels, I said.